In just a couple of days, we'll be celebrating the most festive holiday known as Purim, where the entire Jewish nation, no matter where they lived, was saved from the evil decree of the Persian king Achashverosh. The heroes of the story of Purim, known to many of you, I'm certain, were Esther and Mordechai. What's interesting is that the Shabbat before this holiday, we read a special portion. It's called the portion of Amalek. Why? Because we believe that Haman, the villain of the story of Purim, was a descendant of Amalek, a nation that has a long history of being treacherous and mean and evil to the Jewish people. The first time this occurred was when the Jews were leaving Egypt. All the nations had a fear and were in awe of this Jewish nation. Can you imagine? God at your side, 10 plagues, the splitting of the sea. Who would dare raise their hand in defiance to the Jewish nation to obstruct them from going straight into the land of Israel? But the nation of Amalek didn't care. Somehow, they were not fearful of the Jewish people. And the question is why? Everything the rest of the nations heard about, the nation of Amalek heard about. They heard about the splitting of the sea, and so did the nation of Amalek hear about the splitting of the sea. So why was one nation fearful of approaching the Jewish people, and yet they were not? Amalek just reintroduces a problem that we all suffer from. It's called the disconnect between knowledge and our response to that knowledge. You see, sometimes we know things to be true. We actually don't even question their validity or their absoluteness. But nonetheless, we refuse to act upon them. So Amalek also knew that God was at the side of the Jewish people. He knew that God was protecting them. So where everyone else translated that knowledge into the logical response, don't start up with the Jewish people, Amalek didn't take that knowledge and distance themselves from the Jewish people, but they said, we don't care. And they attacked the Jewish nation. And this is why we find an interesting phenomena. Of the many things that we're told about to remember daily, the sages tell us we should remind ourselves about the beauty of Shabbat. That's going to come very soon. Every single week repeats itself. We must remember the story of the manna, the bread that fell from heaven, to always remind ourselves that our livelihood comes from God. But there is only one thing that we're told to remember, that we actually have a portion that we read once a year on Shabbat. It's called reading the portion of Amalek, which we call the portion Shabbat Zachar, Parshat Zachar. Remember what they did to you. Why, of all the things that are really far more a part of the foundation of Judaism that we're meant to remember every day, but yet don't have a special reading on a particular Shabbat to remember that particular episode or story or mitzvah? Why is it that Amalek we have a special reading? And the answer is because really, even though we don't even know who the nation of Amalek is today, the spiritual consequence of Amalek is something that we suffer as individuals from. Because sometimes we have the knowledge. We don't question the validity of God's existence necessarily. We don't even question the truthfulness of Torah. Sometimes we don't even question the tremendous benefit that we get from a particular mitzvah. But yet, just because we have the knowledge doesn't necessarily mean that we react upon it or act upon it. And that's the disconnect that Amalek introduced to the Jewish nation. So what do you do? All of science talks about how does one go from knowledge to action. They say one of the biggest problems is resistance. Generally speaking, we resist as a human being to any change. We get a level of comfortability. That's why we don't like to exercise. We don't like to change habits. But the way to change that is by meditating upon it a little bit more, taking small little steps, and to be able to reconnect what you know to be true to living your life accordingly.